views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups.
Good evening, I'm Eric Hackley, and this is HackonomicsTV. I'm back after a 2-year absence from a 30-year run of producing and hosting live call-in talk shows on Fort Wayne, Indiana, public access television. The reason you haven't been seeing me or hearing from me is I was kicked out of studios and kicked off the air. This next episode gives me chills just to have the opportunity to present. You know, I've heard a whole lot on the bus lately and all around town about this museum incident, and people were saying that, oh, you know, Mrs. Stith, she's getting a little bit older and she's slowing down a whole lot and she's probably not as sharp as she used to be. Well, for the next hour, I'd like for you to listen to her, and you can determine for yourself if you think that she's slowed down or is missing a beat or anything like that. So, ladies and gentlemen, just to shut up a lot of people, a lot of critics across Fort Wayne who don't know what they're talking about, who have never been to the museum, and if they would have had a chance to meet this lady on their own. But nevertheless, I'd like to introduce to you Mrs. Hana Stith. Involved in a war at the museum over the past many months. Has that all been resolved?
No, that has not been resolved. And I really think that it will never be resolved. And I would just like to make a correction. It has not been the past few months that I've had problems with the board. It has been the past year, going on 2 years, that I've had issues and disagreement with the board. And it is not settled, and I don't think it will ever be settled. So things at the present time are kind of like in limbo.
So will the museum survive?
Well, on February the 18th, I was locked out of the museum. And when I was interviewed by the newspaper or the TV stations, the very first thing I said to them, this is perhaps the end of what we know as the African American Museum. And I still feel on that day that was the end of what we know as the African American Museum. And I wish, but I have great doubts in my mind that it will continue.
But tell me, you know, what gave you the idea originally to try to put a museum together?
Well, what happened is in 1975, when Fort Wayne started, you know, to celebrate, well, I guess it was before that, but I became involved. In 1975, when Fort Wayne began to celebrate their country's bicentennial, there were no blacks involved in the actual planning of the celebration for 1976, our 200th anniversary. So Gail Greer, who was CEO of the Urban League at that time, contacted me and Miles Edwards, because we were both educators and we were also natives of Fort Wayne, and asked if we would become interested in working with the committee and helping to involve activities for the African American people in this celebration for 1976. And that is how I became interested in Fort Wayne's Black history in 1975, because we were not represented at all in the celebration. And I knew that I was born in Fort Wayne and there had been black people here ever since I could remember. I went to the library. They had very little information on African American people. They had a folder, and in that folder they had some clippings of various activities, like, oh, maybe Marjorie Wycliffe had written a history of Fort Wayne with no dates in it at all, and it was mostly about her family. And the other clippings were incidental, nothing of importance, nothing really with history. And then I went to the History Center, which was the Fort Wayne Museum at that time, and they had 4 pictures of black people. And I was so elated when I saw those 4 pictures, because They had been taken in 1936, and I knew a lot of people on those pictures. And that is when I became really interested in Black history in Fort Wayne. And those 4 pictures had been taken what was called the Red Feather Agency at that time in 1936. And they all happened at that time, which was called the Fort Wayne Wheatley Center. So I really became interested in history of Black people in Fort Wayne because there was none, and I knew somebody needed to do something about it. So I started out interviewing elderly people, and I interviewed 6 elderly people. I made tapes, and I turned those over to the Allen County Museum. I took pictures, and we were able for the first time ever to have a display, an exhibit of Black people at the Allen County Museum at that time. So that was my interest in it and the beginning of me becoming involved in African American history in Fort Wayne. And you know, when I interviewed those 6 people, the thing that was more difficult than anything else was remembering dates. You know, people can tell you what happened, but they found it very difficult in coming up with the dates. But it was very interesting to start research, putting dates on places, names on people. Very interesting. And I worked at this project from 1975, still working on it up to the present time. I've been involved in it nearly 40 years in Black history in Fort Wayne.
But when you said 1976, so you guys also had a parade that year, the first ever Juneteenth parade here in Fort Wayne.
Yes, we did. We had the largest celebration that year that has ever been held in Fort Wayne. I imagine we had about 10,000 people. We had the celebration in Memorial Park, and it lasted all day. We had a parade, and I had asked for the mayor of Gary, who was Richard Hatcher at that time, to lead the parade, but at the last minute, he was not able to honor the engagement. And so Mayor Armstrong was our parade master that day. And we went from the Lincoln Life parking lot off Calhoun Street to Memorial Park. I have pictures of it. It was a fabulous parade. We celebrated all day. So that was the very first parade and celebration that we had of giant proportions in the city of Fort Wayne. And that happened on June 19th, or for Juneteenth, 1976. And I have been collecting and saving things about Black people all of these years. I stored them in my husband's warehouse. I stored them in my basement. And I had so very many things. And I was given a grant that I did a traveling exhibit. And the traveling exhibit was like in Headwaters Park. We had it at the Old Fort Y, various places that traveling exhibit went. And that was the beginning of my collecting things for African American history, and also the exhibit that we had at the Allen County Museum. That was really the beginning of the birth of a museum in the city of Fort Wayne.